Listen, consistency is not a talent. It's not a gift. It's not something you're born with. Consistency is a decision backed by discipline. Most people pray for success while practicing inconsistency and then wonder why their lives don't change. But today, you're about to learn how to force yourself into the habits that create unstoppable momentum. Consistency begins with clarity. You cannot be consistent with what you have not committed to. Most people are inconsistent because their goals are vague, their standards are negotiable, and their excuses are stronger than their reasons. But when you take a moment and you define what you want, why you want it, and who you must become to achieve it, your consistency becomes automatic. The secret is simple: make the decision once, not every day. You don't wake up and decide whether you're going to be disciplined. Deciding one time is the turning point where your future stops being accidental and starts being intentional. Most people think consistency is something they have to fight for every morning, as if greatness depends on how they feel when they wake up. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Once you make a real decision, once you commit fully, once you eliminate every escape route, consistency is no longer a daily negotiation. It's a lifestyle. The problem is that most people think they've decided, but they've only considered, they've only hoped, they've only wished. A true decision cuts off every other possibility. It creates a psychological shift where your mind stops entertaining alternatives and starts engineering results. And the moment that happens, your entire life begins to move in a new direction. Here's the hook most people miss. You don't need to decide every day. You need to decide once. And then discipline becomes automatic. The reason so many struggle with consistency is because they're stuck in a loop of daily decision making. They wake up asking, am I in the mood? Do I feel like it today? Is this the right time? And every time you allow feelings to cast a vote, inconsistency wins the election. But when you make a binding decision, one backed by identity, not emotion, you silence the debate. You shut down the negotiations. You tell your brain, this is who I am now. And once the identity shifts, the behavior follows without argument. Imagine this. A person who decides one time to become a healthy individual doesn't negotiate with donuts every morning. A person who decides one time to build a business doesn't need motivation every day to make calls. A person who decides one time to grow financially doesn't need constant reminders to stay disciplined. This is the hidden secret most high achievers live by. They remove the option for inconsistency. Their habits don't ask their feelings for permission. Their decisions aren't rented, they are owned. When you lock in a decision at the identity level, consistency becomes the natural byproduct. Here's the powerful hook. A weak decision makes your journey harder. A strong decision makes it automatic. Weak decisions are built on emotion. Strong decisions are built on commitment. Weak decisions rely on motivation. Strong decisions rely on identity. Weak decisions fade. Strong decisions transform. And transformation doesn't happen when you feel ready. It happens when you decide you're done living below your potential. When you decide one time, you give your brain a single instruction. This is the mission. And your subconscious begins reorganizing your habits, your focus, your energy, and even your environment around that mission. Suddenly, procrastination loses its power. Distractions feel weaker. Excuses no longer make sense. You stop letting temporary feelings interrupt permanent goals. You move differently. You think differently. You show up differently. And people start noticing that something about you has changed. But the truth is nothing changed. You just finally decided. And here's the hook that snaps people awake. Direction beats intention. You can intend to grow for 10 years and make no progress. But the moment you really decide, your direction changes instantly. It doesn't take 5 years. It takes 5 seconds of clarity. And from that point on, you're no longer forcing yourself to be consistent. You're simply living in alignment with the person you decided to become. The secret is this: when your decision becomes non-negotiable, your consistency becomes inevitable, not emotional, not fragile, not temporary, inevitable. And that's when life opens doors most people never get close to, because you chose what they avoided. You chose to decide once, fully, completely, and permanently. Most people lose the battle for consistency because they rely on motivation, and motivation is the most unreliable partner you can choose. It shows up when it wants, disappears when life gets tough, and leaves you stranded when you need it the most. That's why successful people don't depend on motivation. They depend on systems. A system is a structure that makes success predictable. It's a routine that removes emotion from the process. It's a set of behaviors designed to operate even when you don't feel inspired. And here's the hook most people never understand. Systems don't care about your mood. Systems don't need your permission. Systems work even when you don't want to. That's why they win. Building systems means designing your environment, your habits, and your daily patterns in a way that forces follow through. Because if you don't build a system, life will hand you chaos. And chaos is the enemy of consistency. Think about it, the people who succeed in any area: fitness, business, finance, faith, relationships. Didn't get there because they felt motivated every day. They got there because they built a system that didn't ask their feelings for instructions. Systems take the weight off your willpower. Willpower tires out. Systems are permanent. Willpower is emotional. Systems are structural. Willpower asks, do I feel like it? Systems say, do it anyway. Here's a hook that snaps people awake. If your success depends on motivation, your success is already in danger. Motivation is a spark. Systems are the engine. You don't need to be deeply inspired to follow a system. You just follow it step by step, day after day. And that's the real secret behind consistent people. They don't wake up trying to figure out the day. Their day is already built. Their routine is already in motion. Their habits run automatically, and that automation is what creates momentum. When you build a system, you make inconsistency difficult. You eliminate guesswork. You eliminate hesitation. You eliminate the emotional negotiations that keep most people stuck at the starting line. A system answers the question before your feelings get a chance to vote. This is why people who operate from systems achieve more with less stress. They're not fighting themselves every day. They're not wrestling with resistance every morning. Their system carries them forward like a conveyor belt toward their goals. And here's another powerful hook: discipline feels impossible only when your system is weak. When your system is strong, discipline becomes almost effortless. You don't need to think, you just need to execute. You don't need to be inspired, you just need to follow the pattern. A good system makes success the default outcome instead of the rare result. It's like setting your life on autopilot, but in the direction of your highest potential, not your lowest habits. Most people fail because they try to change their life through intensity instead of structure. They want to grind hard for 3 days instead of systemize their life for 3 years. But intensity without a system burns out. Structure without emotion builds empires. If you're tired of restarting, tired of breaking promises to yourself, Tired of making progress only to lose it? Don't wait for more motivation. Build a stronger system. A system will do the heavy lifting on the days motivation is missing. A system will move you forward when your feelings try to hold you back. A system will force consistency without forcing stress. And here's the hook that separates winners from the crowd. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Goals create direction. Systems create results. You don't need a stronger desire. You need a stronger design. You don't need more hype. You need more habits. Once you build a system that supports the life you want, consistency stops being a daily struggle and becomes a natural rhythm. Because success isn't something you chase. It's something your system produces. Turning discipline into identity is the moment your life stops running on pressure and starts running on purpose. Most people try to be consistent by forcing themselves into action, but force is temporary. Pressure wears off. Willpower eventually collapses. The real breakthrough happens when discipline is no longer something you do. It's something you are. When your habits become an extension of your identity, consistency becomes effortless. You don't chase discipline, you live it. And here's the hook that wakes people up instantly. You can't outperform the story you tell yourself about yourself. If you see yourself as inconsistent, you will act inconsistent. If you identify as someone who tries, you will always stay stuck in the cycle of restarting. But when you shift your identity to a disciplined person, your behavior aligns automatically. The truth is that behavior follows identity the same way a shadow follows your body. When you see yourself as disciplined, every action you take rises to that standard. You stop acting like someone trying to change, and you start acting like someone who has already changed. That identity shift is the most powerful transformation a person can experience because it rewires your self-image. Most people don't fail due to lack of skill or intelligence. They fail because their identity is still attached to who they used to be. They're trying to build a new future while holding on to an old version of themselves. And that inner conflict destroys consistency. Discipline is hard when you believe you're working against yourself, but it becomes natural when you believe discipline is part of who you are. Here's the hook that hits deep. Your identity is always casting votes for your habits. Every time you show up, you're reinforcing a belief about yourself. Every time you skip, you reinforce the opposite. So the question is simple. What identity are your actions voting for? Because your identity is shaped through repetition. You don't become disciplined from one big push. You become disciplined through daily decisions that reinforce the same truth. This is who I am. Even the smallest act of follow through strengthens that identity. Every time you keep your word to yourself, you're building the internal reputation that creates real confidence. And confidence is just self-trust. Trust that you will do what you said you would do. This is why disciplined people don't see discipline as pain. They see it as alignment. Their actions align with their identity. So discipline doesn't drain them. It defines them. They don't need motivation to show up because showing up is who they are. They don't negotiate with their emotions because their identity is stronger than their feelings. They don't collapse under pressure because pressure can't break a person who knows exactly who they are. When discipline becomes identity, everything becomes simpler. Not easier, simpler. There's less noise in your mind, less debating, less delaying. You remove the tug of war between who you are and who you want to be. Here's the hook many people never learn. You cannot create a disciplined life with an undisciplined identity. You must become the person before you experience the results. Your identity must upgrade before your lifestyle upgrades. And that's why real transformation feels so powerful. Because it's not about fixing your habits. It's about redefining your self-image. When you believe you are a disciplined person, discipline becomes your default response, not your forced behavior. You show up because that's what people like you do. You follow through because that's how people like you operate. You take action because that's who you chose to become. The moment discipline becomes part of your identity, consistency becomes inevitable. Not because you're perfect, not because you're superhuman, but because you finally understand the truth your life is a reflection of who you believe you are. Change the identity, and the behavior follows like gravity. And from that point on, discipline isn't a struggle. It's your standard. When your why becomes bigger than your weakness, consistency stops being a chore and becomes a calling. Most people struggle with follow through not because they lack ability, but because their reasons aren't strong enough to override their excuses. Weak reasons create weak results. A shallow why produces shallow effort. But when your why goes deep, when it touches something emotional, meaningful, and non-negotiable, you tap into a level of discipline that doesn't come from willpower, but from purpose. And purpose is far stronger than feelings. Here's the hook most people never realize. Your excuses don't disappear when you get stronger. They disappear when your reason becomes undeniable. You don't beat your weaknesses by fighting them. You beat them by outgrowing them. A powerful why gives you clarity when your mind is confused, strength when your body is tired, and direction when life feels overwhelming. It becomes the internal engine that drives you forward long after motivation fades. When your why is weak, every obstacle feels heavy. Every challenge feels discouraging. Every delay feels like a reason to give up. But when your why is strong, those same obstacles become reminders of what you're fighting for. You don't run from difficulty, you push through it because the goal matters too much to quit. And here's the hook that opens people's eyes. You don't need a perfect plan, just a purpose big enough to pull you through imperfection. Weakness becomes irrelevant when your purpose becomes dominant. Think about people who transform their health, rebuild their finances, or shift their entire mindset. They don't succeed because they suddenly became machines. They succeed because their why became louder than their comfort. They weren't chasing motivation. They were answering a calling. When your reason is powerful enough, you don't have to force yourself to show up. You feel compelled to. There's a difference between pushing yourself and being pulled by your purpose. Pushing drains energy. Purpose generates energy. People quit when they push. People endure when they're pulled. Here's the hook that shakes the soul. You're not inconsistent. You're just not emotionally connected to your reason. When your why touches something personal, something painful, or something visionary, your internal standards change instantly. Suddenly you stop tolerating the habits that held you back. You stop negotiating with excuses. You stop allowing temporary comfort to steal permanent opportunity. A compelling why makes you rise to a level of commitment that your old self would never recognize. It makes discipline feel meaningful instead of miserable. It gives every sacrifice purpose. You stop saying, I have to do this, and you start saying, I'm meant to do this. Your why also elevates your long-term vision. When you know exactly why you're fighting, you stop falling for distractions disguised as opportunities. You stop wasting time trying to impress people who aren't part of your purpose. You stop chasing quick dopamine and start chasing real destiny. Purpose makes you focused. Purpose makes you resilient. Purpose makes you unstoppable. When you're connected to your why, even your failures become fuel. You learn from every setback because your mission is bigger than the moment. And that mission becomes the guiding force that protects your consistency. And here's the hook that separates the committed from the casual. Most people quit because their why is built on convenience, not conviction. Convenience collapses under pressure. Conviction gets stronger under pressure. When you build your why on convictions, faith, family, future, legacy, you unlock a version of yourself that excuses can't compete with. Weakness loses its voice. Fear loses its influence. Procrastination loses its grip. You aren't fighting your weaknesses anymore. You're moving so purposefully that your weaknesses can't keep up. The stronger your why, the less power your excuses have. And once your purpose becomes bigger than your comfort, consistency is no longer a battle. It's the natural expression of who you are becoming. Rewarding progress rather than chasing perfection is one of the most liberating and powerful strategies for building long-term consistency. Most people destroy their own momentum because they expect flawless execution from day one. They think if they miss one day, the whole journey is ruined. They think if they make one mistake, they've failed. But perfection is not only unrealistic, it's paralyzing. It convinces people that anything less than ideal effort is worthless, and that mindset kills more dreams than failure ever could. Progress, however, is different. Progress celebrates movement, not mastery. It honors effort, not errors. And here's the hook most people never understand. Perfection demands that you do everything. Progress only requires that you do something. And when you shift your focus from perfection to progress, you remove the pressure that stops people from even starting. Rewarding progress creates a psychological win every time you take action, no matter how small. When your brain feels rewarded, it wants to repeat the behavior. That repetition builds momentum, and momentum builds consistency. This is why people who focus on progress achieve more. They feel good about showing up instead of feeling guilty for not being perfect. Guilt slows you down, but progress speeds you up. The more progress you recognize, the more fuel you create for your own discipline. And the secret hook is this: small wins compound into big victories over time. The person who moves forward 1% every day will outrun the person who tries to move 100% in one day and burns out. You can't build consistency by overwhelming yourself. You build it by stacking small, repeatable wins. Perfection is heavy. Progress is light. When you chase perfection, every mistake feels like a setback. When you reward progress, every action feels like a step forward. One mindset punishes you, the other empowers you. This is why high achievers don't obsess over flawless performance. They obsess over continuous improvement. They realize that excellence is built through iterations, adjustments, learning curves, and persistence. They embrace the process instead of idolizing the outcome. And here's the hook that snaps people awake. Perfect is imaginary. Progress is real. You can improve something real. You can build on something real. But you cannot improve what you never start. And perfection is the excuse that keeps people stuck at the starting line. Rewarding progress also builds resilience. When you expect perfection, the first setback becomes a reason to quit. When you value progress, the same setback becomes a lesson. Failure doesn't feel final, it feels instructive. Instead of saying, I messed up, so I'm done, you say, I learned something, so I'm better. That shift makes you unstoppable, because the people who win are not the ones who avoid mistakes. They're the ones who recover quickly and keep moving. Progress makes recovery natural. Perfection makes recovery painful. And if you want consistency, you must build a mindset that allows you to continue even when conditions aren't ideal. Rewarding progress also creates emotional safety. When you stop punishing yourself for imperfections, you allow yourself to experiment, grow, and evolve. You stop tying your worth to your performance. You stop getting discouraged by temporary dips. This emotional safety opens the door to more creativity, more discipline, and more confidence. Here's a hook worth remembering. Confidence is built through accumulated progress, not instantaneous perfection. Every time you acknowledge your forward movement, you reinforce belief in yourself. And belief is the foundation of consistency. People don't quit because they're incapable. They quit because they stop believing that they can improve. Progress keeps you present, while perfection keeps you stressed. Progress focuses on what you did today. Perfection obsesses over everything you didn't do perfectly. One leads to gratitude and growth. The other leads to frustration and procrastination. When you reward progress, you train your mind to recognize effort as success. That mindset makes you more consistent, more motivated, and more aligned with your long-term goals. The truth is simple. Success is just accumulated progress. Every major breakthrough is built on small, consistent steps. And here's the hook that transforms lives. The person who rewards progress will always outlast the person who demands perfection. Because progress is sustainable and perfection is impossible. And consistency is born from what you can sustain. Keeping the promises you make to yourself is one of the most powerful forms of personal leadership. And it is the foundation of true consistency. Every time you follow through on what you said you would do, you're not just completing a task, you're shaping your identity, strengthening your confidence, and building a reputation with the most important person in your life, you. Most people think motivation creates consistency. But here's the hook they miss. Consistency is built on self-trust. If you don't trust yourself to follow through, no amount of motivation will save you. You cannot build a strong future on a weak relationship with yourself. And the fastest way to weaken that relationship is breaking your own promises. When you tell yourself you're going to wake up early, show up to the gym, focus on your goals, save money, study, or build your craft, and then you're teaching your subconscious one dangerous message. My word doesn't matter. This creates internal doubt. And doubt is the enemy of consistency. People spend years trying to fix their habits when the real problem is that they stopped believing themselves a long time ago. But the opposite is also true. Every time you follow through, even in a small way, you increase self-trust. You show your mind that your words carry weight. You prove to yourself that you're reliable, capable, and serious about your growth. And here's a powerful hook. Your future expands or shrinks based on how much you trust yourself. Keeping promises to yourself also creates a powerful psychological loop. Follow through produces confidence. Confidence produces courage. Courage produces action. Action produces results. And results reinforce confidence again. It's a cycle that, once activated, becomes a self-sustaining engine of growth. But the cycle only starts when you do what you said you would do. Many people wait for confidence to magically show up before they act. They wait to feel ready, not realizing that readiness is created by action. Confidence doesn't precede follow through. It is the result of it. Every step you take, every promise you honor builds internal strength. That strength becomes consistency. That consistency becomes momentum, and momentum becomes transformation. The promises you make to yourself also represent your standards. If you break them easily, You communicate to your mind that your standards are negotiable. And when your standards are negotiable, your results become unpredictable. Life will always test your commitment. There will always be temptations, distractions, and excuses waiting to pull you off track. But when your standards are non-negotiable, your behavior becomes predictable. You stop depending on willpower. You stop arguing with yourself. You operate from principle instead of preference. Here's the hook that reveals the truth. Follow. Through is not about what you want right now. It's about who you want to become permanently. Keeping your promises also builds emotional integrity. When you say one thing and do another, your mind experiences internal conflict. That conflict turns into stress, guilt, and frustration. But when your actions match your words, your emotional life stabilizes. You feel aligned, focused, clear, and strong. You eliminate the guilt that comes from self-betrayal. You eliminate the anxiety that comes from inconsistency. You eliminate the fear that comes from not trusting your future self. This emotional alignment makes discipline feel natural instead of forced. It becomes easier to show up, easier to persist, easier to move forward because you're not fighting yourself anymore. And here's the hook that wakes people up. Self-respect is built through self-discipline. You can't respect yourself if you constantly abandon your commitments. And without self-respect, it's impossible to maintain long-term consistency. People who keep their promises walk differently, think differently, and act differently because they know they can rely on themselves. They set higher goals because they trust they'll pursue them. They push through discomfort because they trust they won't quit. They rise after failure because they trust they'll try again. Their entire life elevates because their self-trust elevates. The truth is simple. Your life will always rise to the level of the promises you keep, not the promises you make. Anyone can set a goal. Very few follow through. But if you want to be consistent, if you want to grow, if you want to transform your life in a way that is undeniable, start by honoring your own word. Start by doing exactly what you said you would do, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when no one is watching. Because when you keep your promises to yourself, you become unstoppable, not because life gets easier, but because you get stronger. So here's the truth. You don't need more motivation. You need a deeper commitment. Make your vision non-negotiable. Make your standards higher than your excuses. And make consistency your new identity, not your occasional mood. When you force yourself to follow through, even when it's uncomfortable, you create a level of discipline that separates you from 99% of people. Remember, success doesn't come to the most emotional. It comes to the most consistent. And starting today, consistency is no longer your struggle. It's your superpower.